The Endless Steppe by Esther Hautzig, Chapter 10. A question like that in a place like that becomes a perpetual shadow. But a breeze or two reminiscent of spring on its way, however agonizingly slowly, began to come up from the south, and I was allowed to go back to school. The children gathered round me. Even in Siberia there was nothing like a broken limb or a prolonged illness to make a momentary hero or heroine of the most ignored child. What had I been sick with? Typhus? Flu? Pneumonia? Scarlet fever? They asked cheerfully, and were quite disappointed that it had only been bronchitis, although they did seem moderately pleased that I had survived. Only Svetlana continued to ask as if a fatal illness would have suited her better, and she was most impatient with my inability to catch up with the work that I missed. I was beginning to feel less of an outsider, almost, not quite, as if I belonged. I enjoyed the irony of the little capitalists joining the little comrades as we sang the Internationale in assembly. Arise, ye prisoners of starvation, arise, ye humble of the earth. I sang as loudly and lustily as the rest. 'Tis the final conflict, for the International Soviet shall be the human race. And up went my fist along with the rest. There was a great deal of choral singing in the assembly, most of it, unfortunately, political rather than classical. But singing along with the others helped the feeling of belonging. However, among ourselves, away from assembly, we sang the songs that pleased us the most, great favorites being Russian folk songs. The news that an American movie was coming to Robust sent the school into a dither. The Russian movies, including some of the great ones, were all right. But nothing was as exciting as an American movie. Everyone wanted to go. It was the topic. Are you going? Aren't you going? When are you going? Who are you going with? 2 girls invited me to go with them. I was beside myself. An invitation in itself was something I longed to accept. Any invitation would do, and I also longed to see a movie. How much does it cost? I asked. 4 rubles, I was told. 4 rubles, Mother exclaimed. That's a lot of money. My heart sank, and I could feel an enormous wail coming up in me. I held it back and merely looked tragic. A family council was called. Man cannot live by bread alone, my fun-loving grandmother said. That's the whole point, Mother agreed acidly. 4 rubles toward a piece of meat. You call that meat? Grandmother was getting cross. Father, the great peacemaker, intervened. The child must go to the movie. Must? Mother asked, and even Grandmother looked surprised. Must, Father repeated, and refused to amplify, leaving the strong impression that the fate of all Polish deportees was at stake. Behind their backs, he winked at me. The movie theater, which I now decided was a very pretty little white building, was behind the marketplace and close to a small park which, for some reason, was ignored by the children of Robust. Possibly because it was the gathering place for the grown-ups. But tonight many children were streaking across it on their way to the movie. The auditorium was jammed with squealing children. No teachers here, only ordinary grown-ups whose admonitions to quiet down didn't count. The light dimmed. There was electricity here, of course, the first I had seen since I left Vilna, and everyone quieted down and waited attentively. The movie was Charlie's Aunt, with Jack Benny, with Russian subtitles, and we screamed with laughter. It was strange enough to be sitting here in this bare hall in Siberia, watching an English movie that had been made in Hollywood. Walking home in the dark, surrounded by the huge steppe, now broken by patterns in the slightly melting snow, it was Jack Benny, cavorting around in his ridiculous wig, who was most present, the scenes of Oxford that were most real. That movie lasted us a long time. We hashed and rehashed it until there was scarcely a reel that went unremarked. And it brought me just a bit closer to belonging, a condition I was beginning to hold more blissful than a full belly. A day that I was invited to play a game of dominoes or hopscotch I counted as a big one that sent me home bursting to tell my grandmother about it. But I had no best friend, no one to tell secrets to, no one to play games with. By all the rules and regulations, it should have been Svetlana who was my best friend. Svetlana did not see it that way. At first I thought it was because she was a snob. Her father was the director of the dairy farm and therefore a member of the manager's class. They lived in a clean little white house with curtains at the window, and they had milk every day and eggs frequently. I went to her house to get my books, but I never was invited to stay. I had noticed that the children of the big shots tended to stick together, and I thought that Svetlana was afraid to have a miserable little deportee as her best friend, that it would dethrone her as the queen bee. But little by little I saw that she was not a snob, that she was friendly enough with other children, much less fortunate than herself. Why not me? The answer to that was whispered into my ear as a secret I was to keep if I wished to live. The informer, another girl in my class, whispered that it was Svetlana who envied me. Not my fairy tale past, but all the things, my braid, my less than shining clean long braids. Since I did wish to live, I used all the willpower I had to keep from telling Svetlana that to keep long braids, even reasonably clean, was a great chore. We almost never had soap, and hot water was a problem when so many people had to use the stove and when cinders were scarce too. I kept the secret but I began my campaign to have my braids cut off. The direct approach didn't work. "Please cut my braids off," I asked Mother. Mother responded with a firm no, the kind from which there was no appeal. It was very uncommon in the Jewish culture at that time to have your hair cut. Most women let their hair grow forever. Exactly what my braids represented to my mother then, I did not know. I continued to nag. She continued to stand firm. I scratched my head ostentatiously. I bit on my braids. I pretended that their odor was enormously offensive to me. "You've always had long hair," Mother said. "Everyone else has short hair. As good a reason as I have ever heard for having long hair. But you are you and they are they. I don't want to be me. I want to be them. You don't understand." Perhaps she didn't. But it must have hurt to contemplate even the possibility that her child might discard her own rich heritage for a toehold in this land of exile, this thoroughly alien land. So I think Mom's biggest fear was probably that Esther was becoming ingrained in the Siberian/Russian culture, and Mom did not want that. And you'll see when you get to the end of the book, it becomes a big problem. "Esther!" There was both pain and shock in the exclamation. I covered my ears. The battle between the generations was on. "I'll cut it myself," I threatened, unusually rebellious for me, "and it will be a big mess." I burst into tears. Tears of confusion and frustration as much as anything else. Didn't anyone care that I needed to belong, needed a best friend? What's the worst you've ever done to try and belong to a group of people? "We'll talk about it tomorrow," my mother said slowly. The next evening, Mother told me curtly that she was going to cut my hair. But it was because there was no soap and for no other reasons. Certainly not because I wanted to look like everyone else. Did I understand? Oh, yes, I assured Mother, beside myself with joy and secretly blessing the lack of soap. Anya provided the scissors, and everyone had some advice. Not too short, a little shorter. Watch your ear. So, Mother put the scissors down. She looked as if she were about to weep. She gathered the shorn braids together. "Let me see." Anya held the mirror up, and my heart sank. I looked like something the cat had dragged in. That's a very good idiom. Simile, also. Because cats usually drag in nasty, old, half-alive animals. "A little hot water and some brushing," Grandmother said, none too optimistically. In the end, it was my father who almost convinced me that I looked absolutely marvelous, and I couldn't wait to go to school the next morning. The final judgment would be made by my classmates, in particular Svetlana. It worked. I had performed the initiation rite. For better or for worse, I had become one of them. "Hey, stupid!" a boy called out as I missed a ball he threw my way. I was beginning to be happy. One day I might even be lucky enough, when my clothes were completely in tatters, to wear clothes like yours. One day, if I was very lucky, I might even get a green quilted jacket, a fufaika. On the way to Svetlana's house, I told her of this secret wish. For the first time, she asked me to stay. We ate sunflower seeds, spitting the shells out till our chins were bearded with them. Now I had a best friend. I thought I would die of happiness.